Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And before we begin, I want to thank my listeners for their prayers and support during my most recent bout with bronchitis. Apologize for my listeners for my absence, and I beg your patience, and thank you very much for your prayers and concerns. Now, I wish to get busy this morning with our return to the reading and discussion of the book, The History of Romanism by John Dowling. We'll begin our reading in subsection 38 on page 277 for those who are following along in the work. But before we begin our reading, we want to recap a little bit for those who have patiently waited for my return to the program. My voice is a little bit weak this morning, but I'll struggle through as my recovery continues. But to recap, before we continue with subsection 38, we're talking about one of the most memorable and consequential events in British history. The great contest between the reigning pope at the time, Pope Alexander, Antichrist Pope Alexander, and his man in Canterbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas A. Becket on the one side, and the King of England, King Henry in this case, and all of his barons, and even most of the Roman Catholic priesthood at that time on the other. A cataclysmic contest between the papacy and the civil power. Now, we know our Bible says that he, the Antichrist, the Pope, reigns over the kings of the earth. And during this period of time, the 12th century, the middle of the 12th century, the papacy did indeed rule all over the kings of the earth, except England. England was one of the very last holdouts who rejected the pretended power of the papacy and rebelled against the papacy. Now, again, at this period of time, which history regards as the noonday of the papacy and the midnight of the world, there's a growing controversy between the Pope of Rome, Pope Alexander, and King Henry. Now, Rome was all-powerful at this time. And, as we even see today, when the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy are powerful, their priests are corrupt. Okay? Criminals. I mean, do I need to even mention the global pedophile priest pandemic and the seemingly powerlessness of the world's court to bring these pedophile priests to justice and to prosecute the papacy over these monumental crimes? World-class criminals. And no one can bring them to justice. The world court cannot even file a charge against the papacy. It has said so publicly. So the world just has to tolerate these pedophile priests. No one dares condemn them. Well, at the time of the writing of this account of England, it's the middle of the 12th century, 1164, the priests were all powerful and they were all criminal. Thefts, robberies, extortions, and murders. And we recently read the account of, at this period of time, one of the priests of Rome had debauched a young virgin. And in order to spare himself and his girlfriend, if you will, from the wrath of her father, he killed him. A very rich and powerful man in England. He killed him. And the king got wind of it. And the sins of the Roman Catholic priest had, as it were, reached unto heaven. and the king had to do something about it. So he instructed the Archbishop of Canterbury to surrender that violent priest, that criminal priest, to the king's court to be tried and punished for his crimes. The Archbishop of Canterbury refused to surrender that priest and instead protected him from the justice of the civil power. And in the meantime, word of it got to Rome, and the Pope issued a papal bull, one of the most powerful writings that a pope can write, relieving the Archbishop of Canterbury from his oath of submission to the Constitution of Clarendon. The Constitution of Clarendon was an attempt of the civil power of Rome, or the civil power of England, to hold the priests accountable for their crimes. And after first swearing to uphold the constitutions of Clarendon, and thus making it necessary for him to surrender this priest, the Pope issued a papal bull to the Archbishop of Canterbury, in this case Thomas A. Becket, absolving him from that oath. The papal bull said, "You answer to me and to me only, and you do not answer to the king. And if there's a charge brought against one of my priests, you are to protect that priest. They are my priests, not the king's priests." All right? And now, since the Roman Catholic canon law doesn't have any provision for capital punishment or any other punishment that fit the crime, these priests literally were without fear of the civil power. And so their criminality only exploded. So you see the controversy? The papacy is going to use this incident as an opportunity to extend and to reinforce his lawlessness. The man of sin, the son of perdition, just like the Bible describes him. He's going to usurp his authority over the just king of England. He's going to protect these criminal priests, and that's just the way it is. And the Bible predicts it. We know he reigneth over the kings of the earth. All right, so push is going to come to shove. Okay, Becket tried to leave the country. And God is in charge of the weather, despite what some will tell you. And because of contrary winds, Becket was not allowed to leave the country. The boat kept blowing right back to shore. So this contest is going to be held for all of history to account. Who's going to win in this controversy? Now, the king had sent someone to confiscate all of Becket's money, all of his chattels, all of his possessions, and hold him in contempt of court for not showing up at the civil power, the king's court, with that criminal priest. And when they went to confiscate all of his goods, Becket was there, not able to leave the country. So the king was summoned. The king came to Becket's apartment and says, "Why'd you try to leave? Do you think England's too small for the both of us?" And that's all that was said. But the controversy continues. Now, subsection 38, page 277, it says, "Soon after this interview, this direct confrontation between the king and Becket, Thomas A. Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was protecting these priests, it says, fresh misunderstandings arose between the king, that is King Henry, and the primate, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas A. Becket, who publicly protected the clergy from those punishments which their crimes deserved, and flatly refused to obey a summons to attend the king's court. Henry was so much enraged at these daring insults on his laws and the royal authority that he determined to call him to account before his peers." Okay, who are the peers of the Archbishop of Canterbury? All the other bishops and archbishops and priests of the Roman Catholic Church, and all of the barons, and the king himself. Those are his peers. So he's going to summon Thomas A. Becket to give an account for his actions before his peers in a parliament which he summoned to meet at Northampton on the 17th of October, 1164 A.D. This parliament was unusually full, the whole nation being now deeply interested in the issue of this contest between the crown, that is the king, the civil power, and the mitre, that's the papacy, and this Archbishop Thomas A. Becket. Okay? Now, remember, during this period of time, all the nations of the world, all the kings of this earth, had submitted their authority to the Pope. The Pope literally placed the crown on the kings of the earth at this time. And the Pope usurped his authority that if having received the crown from the Pope could take it off your head too. Okay? So the Pope reigned all over the kings of the earth at this time, except King Henry of England. Now, on the first day, the king in person accused the Archbishop of contumacy in refusing to attend his court when he was summoned, against which accusation, having made only a weak defense, he was unanimously found guilty by the bishops as well as by the temporal barons, and all his goods and chattels were declared to be forfeited. Okay? So look, don't misunderstand. It's Thomas A. Becket and the Pope against all of Britain. The king, the barons, that's the civil power, and also the bishops. So Thomas A. Becket doesn't have any support in England. The only support he has is hidden in the clutches of his hand, a papal bull secretly issued to him by the Pope Alexander, absolving him from his oath to submit to the Council of Clarendon, which required him to surrender that criminal priest and all criminal priests to the king's court for trial. Okay? All the king, all of his court, the barons, the governors, and the bishops, the ecclesiastics of England, demanded that Thomas A. Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, submit to the civil power. So you have the Pope and Thomas A. Becket on one side. You virtually have all of England on the other side in this contest. Now he says many of the bishops waited upon Becket and earnestly entreated him to resign his office, assuring him that if he did not, he would be tried for perjury and high treason. Okay? Now, why do you think the priests and the bishops were trying to get Thomas A. Becket to comply? Because they knew they were going to be victims of this contest. Okay? If the civil power won, Thomas A. Becket didn't submit, then all of the priests would be in fear of the civil power. So, they tried to encourage Becket to submit to the king's court. But Becket, however, was made of sterner stuff. He reproached them, the bishops, bitterly for deserting him in his contest, charged them not to presume to sit in judgment of their primate, and declared that though he should be burnt alive, he would not abandon his station nor forsake his flock. Okay? You've got to understand, the only boldness that Thomas A. Becket could possibly have in this contest was that he held in his hands, secretly, a papal bull, relieving him of his oath to defend the constitutions of Clarendon. So he was not going to submit that diabolical, that criminal, that murderous priest to the king's court. Nor was he going to attend the king's court himself, because he valued the power of the Pope over the king. All right? Now it says, having celebrated Mass, Thomas A. Becket set out from his residence dressed in his pontifical robes with a consecrated host in one hand. You know what that is? That is the piece of bread, the round wafer god of the Roman Catholic Church that is supposed to be, after the priest pronounces his 5 Latin mumbo-jumbo, hoc est corpus meus, it becomes the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Christ. In other words, he was carrying Jesus in his hands. All right? So he set out from his residence dressed in his pontifical robes with a consecrated host in one hand, and when he approached the hall where the king and the parliament sat, he took the cross from the bearer and carried it in the other hand. Okay? So can you imagine this sight when he walks into the court? He's in his pontifical robes. In his robes of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most powerful man in England. The Pope's man in England. He's vested with the power of the Pope in England. He's dressed in his pontifical robes. He's got the consecrated host in one hand, and when he walks into the king's court, he grabs the cross from the cross bearer and carries it in the other hand. He's trying to send a message. You mess with me, you're messing with God. Right? That's the message he's sending to this court. And he says, when the king was informed of the posture in which Becket was advancing, he retired hastily into an inner room. And you got to ask yourself a question. Is this king fearful? You better believe he's fearful. This king has just seen with his own eyes the posture of Thomas A. Becket in his pontifical robes, carrying Jesus in one hand and the cross in the other. And Becket is intent on presenting himself, as it were, Christ himself in that court. Now, of course, for you and me, us Protestants, we would spit in his face, right? The Pope has no power from God, and nor do his priests. And the Eucharist, or the consecrated host, is just a piece of bread. Okay? And the cross is a reminder of Christ's sacrifice. It belongs to us. So what fear would we have of Thomas A. Becket or Pope Alexander? None. But this king, when he saw Thomas A. Becket come into the court in this posture, he retired hastily into an inner room, commanding all the bishops and the barons to follow him. Here he complained of the insufferable annoyance of Becket. You might say he was whining, and was answered by the barons, quote, that he, that is Thomas A. Becket, had always been a vain and obstinate man and ought never to have been raised to such a high station, that he was guilty of high treason both against the king and the kingdom, and they demanded that he should be immediately punished as a traitor, unquote. You see, they seem to have more courage than the king, right? Now the clamors of the barons against Becket became so loud and vehement that the Archbishop of York, fearing they would proceed to acts of violence, hastily retired, that he might not be a spectator of the tragical scene. The Bishop of Exeter went into the great hall where the primate sat alone, that is, almost alone, that is, Thomas A. Becket sitting alone, and falling on his face conjured Thomas A. Becket to take pity on himself and on his brethren, the priests, and preserve them all from destruction by complying with the king's will. But with a stern countenance, Thomas A. Becket commanded them to be gone. Okay? Now you know the motive of these priests who have abandoned Thomas A. Becket. They fear the king. They fear that if they side with Thomas A. Becket, the king can have them beheaded. It's a contest between the Pope and the king. So far, the king holds sway with everyone except Thomas A. Becket. And the only reason the Pope has any sway with Thomas A. Becket is because the Pope claims to be Jesus Christ hidden under a veil of flesh, and that he has just written a thunder from Rome absolving Thomas A. Becket from his oath to uphold the Constitution of Clarendon. That's where Thomas A. Becket's getting his strength. From the Pope. Without that bull in his hand, he would have to submit to the king, to the barons, and to the priests of England, and subject himself to their authority. But Thomas A. Becket sees the power of the Pope that greater than the king and all of his barons and all the bishops. And when the bishops come to plead with him to help spare their own lives, and not only his life alone, but all the bishops, by submitting to the king's will, Becket just says, "Get out of here. I'm not going to submit to you, the barons, or the king, because I got the Pope on my side." All right? Now, subsection 39 says, the bishops, apprehensive of incurring the indignation of the Pope if they proceeded to sit in judgment of their primate, Thomas A. Becket, and of the king and the barons if they refused, begged that they might be allowed to hold a private consultation, which was granted. Okay? The priests are caught between a rock and a really hard place right now. With whom do we side? Where's our best chances of survival? Do we side with the Pope or do we side with the king? So they get into a consultation, a private consultation. Now it says, after they deliberated for some time, they agreed to renounce all subjection to Becket as their primate. Okay? They're not going to any longer be subject to Thomas A. Becket. They're made their decision. They're going to back away from Becket. They're going to side with the king. And they're going to prosecute him for perjury before the Pope. They think they're going to gain sway with the Pope in this case. And it says, and if possible, to procure his deposition. In other words, have Thomas A. Becket unseated from his throne in Canterbury. Now, this resolution they reported to the king and the barons, who, not knowing that Becket had already obtained a bull from the Pope absolving him of his oath, too rashly gave their consent, and the bishops went into the hall in one single body and intimated their resolution to the Archbishop, Thomas A. Becket. The latter, Becket, not deigning to give them any answer except, quote, "I hear," unquote, a profound silence ensued. Now, the contest is on. And it appears, for all intents and purposes, that Thomas A. Becket's being abandoned by the priests of Rome. The priests of Rome are more fearful of the king than they are of the Pope. But they want to maintain their relationship with the Pope, obviously, because their livelihoods depend on it. If the Pope relieves them of their office, they're nothing anymore. They have no power, and they will be subject to the king's authority. if they side with the Pope and Becket, they all might be ready to lose their heads. So you can see the priests of Rome in England are now between a rock and a really hard place. And they get together in a conclave, a private conclave behind doors, and they decide they're not going to support Archbishop Thomas A. Becket anymore. They're going to try to preserve their own lives, and they're going to try to convince Thomas A. Becket to comply with the king. Otherwise, they put all their lives in jeopardy. Becket's putting all of their lives in jeopardy. And Becket's listening to all of this and says not a word except, I hear. I hear you. That's all he said. And why was he so tight-lipped? Because he clutched in his hand a papal bull, absolving him from all allegiance to the king, not bound by any oath to the king, not even the constitutions of Clarendon, and his only authority in this world is the Pope, God himself on the earth. Now it says, in the meantime, the king and the barons came to a resolution that if the primate, Thomas A. Becket, did not give in his accounts and without delay, they would declare him guilty of perjury, that is, falsely swearing to uphold the constitutions of Clarendon, and treason, making war against the king, and deputed certain barons to communicate this resolution. Okay, so he's sending representatives of the civil government, the barons, to go to Becket and give him the ultimatum. Now it says the Earl of Leicester, one of the barons, who was at the head of these barons, addressing himself to Becket, said, quote, the king commands you to come immediately and give your accounts, or else hear your sentence, unquote. Now listen to Becket. My sentence, exclaimed Becket, starting on his feet. No, my son, hear me first. I was given to the church free and discharged from all claims when I was elected Archbishop of Canterbury, and therefore I never will render any account. Besides, my son, neither law nor reason permits sons to judge their father. Okay, what's that telling you? That the king is a son. Okay? And the father is the Pope and his archbishop. No civil law has any power over the priests of Rome. This is Roman Catholic canon law. Now, I got to ask my listeners a question. How often do you think this confrontation takes place between the bishops, the conference of bishops, the archbishops of this country, and the government of the United States? Do you think that somehow after the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, that anything has changed? Or does the Pope and the bishops and the priests of the Roman Catholic Church regard the government of the United States their son, and they are the father? You think that might explain why the pedophile priests who are left to run free all over this world are not brought to account to the civil powers of this country and submitted to court and tried and punished for their unspeakable crimes? And furthermore, how much power do they have over their sons in the White House when push comes to shove? And the Pope says one thing and the President says another. Might this explain why this country seems so diabolical, so criminal, so out of control, so morally bankrupt as it is today? I assert to you it is. You've just seen with your own eyes and heard with your own ears how the papacy ruled and reigned over the kings of the earth, all of Europe, and even England. Is any one of us think themselves so wise as to assert that that cannot be the case in the United States of America. I tell you, you're dreaming. All of history attests who the Antichrist is and how he reigns over the kings of the earth. Are you to tell me that the United States is such a Christian country, such a Protestant country, that this can't be the case in the United States of America? Then answer the question, why does sin so reign in this country? Why does war so reign and even define this country? It's because of the power of the priests. It's because of the power of the archbishops. It's because of the power of the popes over the kings of the earth, even the United States of America. Wherever Rome is powerful, her priests are corrupt, criminal. And the more power they get, the more criminal they are. They do not fear the civil power. They do not answer to the civil power. And not only that, but the civil power is to be their servant. They're crusaders. And whenever the Pope decides to wage war somewhere around the world, he can always count on the United States to mount up and march off to war. And we're never told the truth about what these wars are designed to accomplish. Global sovereignty for the Pope. This country has never fought a war for its own sovereignty. It has never fought a war to secure peace in the world. It has only waged war in the name of the papacy. And Revelation chapter 13 gives us no room for doubt. It describes the first beast who reigned over the kings of the earth and the second beast who caused the whole world to worship the first beast. That's the United States of America. History makes it undeniable. England never has, or rather the United States never has resisted the powers of the Pope as did England at this time. It's a hideous reality, but we must embrace the truth, or we are bound to be deceived. The reason this country is in debt to the tunes of multitudes of trillions of dollars is because the Pope spends our money for us. Our government spends our money in the name of the Pope to achieve his global goals. There's no way to get around it. The criminality of this country is papal, and we must come to grips with it, or there's no hope for the United States of America. Do you realize the crimes that this country has committed over its history? Global crimes. And for what purpose? You surely don't believe that the United States is what it claims to be, the harbinger of peace and prosperity in the world. Not when there's no peace in this country, nor any wealth to speak of. This is a country ridden in debt. Every dollar that you carry in your pocket says at the top of it, Federal Reserve Note. It has no worth unless that worth is counted in debt. Every time you go to the grocery store to buy a loaf of bread, something that has intrinsic value, you hand in payment debt. Now, why are we so indebted? Because we've sworn to uphold Roman Catholic canon law in this country. It costs money to elevate the Pope to global supremacy. And it takes peace from the earth. Peace, peace. When there is no peace, there's no peace. Because we are the battle axe for the Pope. That's why there's no peace in the world. Now, King Henry resisted these pretensions of the Pope, but the government of the United States never has. That's why we are so desperately poor. That's why we've become a warmongering nation, a nation of crusaders. And none of it would have been possible if we'd have believed what the Protestant reformers believed 500 years ago and what every Bible-believing Christian believed all the way back to the Church of Paul. Long before the papacy ever existed, Paul told them, "He who now letteth or restrains will restrain, and then that man of sin will be revealed." After he is taken out of the way, after the Caesars are taken out of the way, then that man of sin will be revealed. Because we have forgotten or have renounced the belief of all Christians throughout history that the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist, this country is now lock, stock, and barrel submissive to Roman Catholic canon law and the pretensions of the Pope. And when the priests and when the bishops and the archbishops stroll into the Oval Office, you better believe whoever's sitting behind that desk snaps to attention. Now, they don't dare do it in front of our eyes. That would be too obvious. This country must remain ignorant of the power exerted by the papacy in the Oval Office and in Congress and in the Supreme Court. Else there might be a new Protestant Reformation here in the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. But we know that's not going to happen. The United States of America is going to continue to be the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. It is written. The United States will never repent of its love for the little god in Rome, the little horn of Daniel, the man of sin of Paul, the Antichrist of John. Will not repent of our idolatry, of our fornicating, our spiritual fornication with the little god in Rome. As long as this country remains loyal to the papacy, as long as the people are unwilling to admit this diabolical relationship between the government of the United States and the papacy, this country ceases to be a Christian nation. We cannot serve two masters. We cannot profess Christ with our mouth and serve the papacy morning, noon, and night with our hands and our feet, and our blood and our guts, and our tax dollars. This country worships two gods. They all claim Christ, but they all serve the devil. And our churches are leading the way. Never would this message be welcome in any of the churches in this country. Never would Inquisition Update be welcome in the churches of this country. The only place I'm welcome is First Amendment Radio. But even if I'm not welcome here any longer, my message will never change. Not as long as God gives me breath. The Archbishop of Canterbury says, "I was given to the church free and discharged from all claims. That is, I do not answer to the civil power, nor any of its claims on my property, which has been given to me by the Pope. I was absolved and discharged from all claims by the civil power when I was elected Archbishop of Canterbury, and therefore I will never render any account to the king." He says, "Besides, my son, neither law nor reason permits sons to judge their father." In other words, I'm the father of King Henry, and he's not going to bring me into court. I'm not going to submit to his authority. The only authority that I acknowledge is that authority which resides in Rome, the Vicar of Christ, the Son of the living God on his throne in Rome. God hidden under a veil of flesh. And he says, "I decline the jurisdiction of the king." What does that mean when you decline the jurisdiction of the king? The king is nothing to you. The king has no power, no jurisdiction. He has no legal authority over you. Okay? The Archbishop of Canterbury, the right hand of Rome in England, says, I declare the jurisdiction of the king null and void, and also that of the barons, and I appeal to God and my Lord the Pope, by whom alone I am to be judged. For you, my brethren and fellow bishops, I summon you to appear before the Pope to be judged by him for having obeyed man rather than God. I put myself, the Church of Canterbury, and all that belongs to it under the protection of God and the Pope, and under their protection I depart hence. Unquote. So, what do you think England's going to do? Thomas Becket and the God of this world on one side, and the bishops, the priests, the archbishops, the barons, and the king on the other. Now it says, having said this, Thomas A. Becket walked out of the hall in great state, leaving the spectators so much disconcerted by his boldness that not an individual had the courage to stop him. Okay? Now ask yourself, who fears whom here? Who has just won the fight? The last truly Protestant bastion in the world is now trembling while Thomas A. Becket walks free out of the hall. Do you think any such thing had ever happened like that in the United States of America? Do you think there's ever been any resistance at all in this country to the authority and pretensions of the Pope and his archbishops? Or do they tremble in their boots just like King Henry and the bishops and the barons? He says the controversial result of this, the tragical result of this controversy is well known. Okay, it's one of the most memorable events in English history. The haughty but courageous primate Thomas A. Becket was assassinated December 29th, 1171, by 4 gentlemen of King Henry's court in consequence of a passionate exclamation they had heard drop from the lips of the king, and was soon after his death canonized as a saint of the very highest rank. Okay? So the King Henry dropped the word, just like Bill Clinton used to do. He'd say a certain thing, and all of his assassins would go out and seek out his enemies and kill them. King Henry had no power but to have Thomas A. Becket assassinated. Now, what does that tell you about King Henry's faith? He didn't have any. That's why he trembled when Thomas A. Becket walked into his court. What was King Henry's weapon of warfare? The sword. Not of the spirit, a steel sword. Had the king armed himself with the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, he might have corrected Thomas A. Becket. But you can't correct the papacy nor his archbishop. Not even with the Word of God. They'll not submit to God's authority. So King Henry failed the contest. Thomas A. Becket was assassinated, and in retaliation, the Roman Catholic papacy canonized Becket a saint and a martyr of the Roman Catholic Church. Gave him a status among the saints of the Roman Catholic Church of the highest rank. Okay? Thomas A. Becket is remembered in the Roman Catholic Church as a god and a martyr. The book says endless were the panegyrics pronounced on his virtues. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church went into overtime elevating Thomas A. Becket. making him an angel among the stars, elevated him to the status of a saint, one of the greatest saints of the Roman Catholic Church. Why? Because he opposed the civil power. He imposed Roman Catholic canon law. He defended the diabolical criminal priests of the Pope. He upheld Roman Catholic canon law and kept those criminal priests out of the king's court to be subject to the Pope alone, so that their crimes might continue and escalate. That is why Thomas A. Becket is elevated to the height of the stars in the Roman Catholic Church. It says, endless were the panegyrics pronounced on his virtues and the miracles wrought by his relics, that is, his physical remains. That's right, you stand in the shadow of some of the physical remains of Thomas A. Becket, you are as if you are standing in the presence of God Almighty, according to Roman Catholic teaching. And his dead bones do miracles, according to the Roman Catholic Church. Remind you of a passage of Scripture, all powerful signs and lying wonders. I'll bet you don't know that the Bible spends an incalculable amount of time describing specifically the identifying characteristics of the Roman Catholic Church. Never calling it by name, but describing it in such detail that you can't get it wrong. All-powerful signs and lying wonders, deceiving the whole world. Thomas A. Becket is not a saint. Thomas A. Becket is a criminal papist. Thomas A. Becket will burn in the flames of hell. Thomas A. Becket worshiped not Christ, but Antichrist. And so do all of his counterparts and all of his peers. And even today, the king and his court. Endless were the panegyrics pronounced in his virtues, and the miracles wrought by his relics, according to the popish historians, were more numerous and more nonsensical and more impudently attested than those which ever filled the legend of any saint or a martyr. Okay? Thomas A. Becket is regarded in the Roman Catholic Church as the saint of saints and the martyr of martyrs. Why? Because he obeyed the Pope and upheld the Pope's supremacy and authority and autonomy over the King of England and his court, and protected the Pope's diabolical criminal priests. That's how you get to be popular in the Roman Catholic Church. That's how you become a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. You see why I call it the synagogue of Satan? It is what it is. And the Bible and history leave none of us any room to doubt. We'll continue tomorrow.